So today we have a new topic for our webinars, and the topic is designing your life. In this section, we're going to be talking about sort of one of the classic design tools is a reframe, and we're going to be reframing this notion of passion, which is a notion I really don't like. So design thinking, for those of you who are, in the webinar audience, probably a lot of you have either done one of our other webinars on this, or you've been reading about it or seeing something about it. You've probably seen this diagram. We have a diagram that's got, hexagons, and we say that this is our process. We start with empathy. We redefine problems, come up with lots of ideas, and prototype and test. And it's a methodology of innovation, that's become quite popular in business and in strategy. But the question is for today's discussion is, can you apply design thinking to this interesting sort of wicked problem of designing maybe your job or your career? Could you turn your career into a calling? And maybe could you even design something as big and as important, but as ambiguous as your life? And we're gonna make the claim and argue that you can do that. Design thinking is a methodology that doesn't replace other methods. Engineering thinking is a very powerful way of solving problems, but to use engineering methods, you need a pretty clearly defined problem, because you'll need to isolate knowns and unknowns, and solving for the unknowns requires that you have enough data to resolve or complete the equations. Business thinking is another kind of thinking, very powerful, where you use figures of merit like net present value or the rate of return on certain investments to make decisions. But design thinking, we typically pull out of our toolkit when we've got a problem that's really ambiguous. Want to design a new cell phone, and you could study users all day long, and if we were in the era of the Motorola Razr or flip phones, none of the user data, polls, focus groups, none of that stuff would ever have created an iPhone. iPhone is a sort of disruptive innovation, and that comes from a design team at Apple that really studied user behaviors, tested ideas rapidly, and then evolved the iPhone. If you remember reading Walter Isaacson's biography, not the new one, but the old one of Steve Jobs, he turned down the phone 3 times because it wasn't good enough. So whenever humans are engaged in the problem, whenever the problem is ambiguous, or what's called a wicked problem, that's actually a term that a couple guys at Berkeley came up with in the 70s. Wicked problems are problems that don't have a yes or no answer. They just have better and worse. Once you solve the problem, a new problem emerges. This is a classic thing in design where you study users, you build exactly what they tell you want, you show it to them, and they say, no, I changed my mind. I don't want that anymore. So design thinking is the tool we turn to most often when we have a big, ambiguous problem that is poorly defined, poorly bounded. And that sounded a lot to us like your life. And so, we were originally inspired by the one question that whenever we talk about this, everybody brings up, and it's the one question that never seems to go away. And that's the question of, what do I want to be when I grow up? When we were first proposing using design thinking in this domain, we were talking to lots of people on campus. Our dean of the School of Engineering, Jim Plummer, who just stepped down this year, and when we told him about the class, and Jim is a highly accomplished professor, one of the best deans we've ever had in the School of Engineering, had been the dean for almost 10 years, and was stepping down to restart his academic career. And he said, I want to take the class because I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And we find that across the board with people we talk to in their 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s, that everybody's still still somewhere along the line, they have to face the question of, what do I want to do next, and what does that mean to me? And so it seemed to us, and us meaning my partner in this endeavor, Dave Evans, who is a lecturer here at Stanford. He's one of the founders of Electronic Arts. He's one of the first guys at Apple on the Macintosh team. a very innovative person who's also really interested and concerned about young adult formation and how do people figure out what they want to do when they grow up. And he and I started down this path, and we created a thing we call the D-Life Labs, and we've been teaching these classes and sort of evolving this curriculum since about 2006. We started with a class called Designing Your Life, which was originally targeted at my senior students who were about to leave the university and face what we call the decision explosion. These are highly implemented students. They've been students, for 18 or 20 years of their lives. They worked hard, in elementary school to make sure they got into a good high school, and then they worked hard in a good high school to get into a school like Stanford. And then they picked a difficult major like engineering or computer science and accomplished that. But when they get to the end of their senior year, there are no more hurdles. You can delay the decision explosion with graduate school, but I refuse to write letters of recommendation for my students if the only reason they want to go to graduate school is so they don't have to think about what to do next. But they're highly accomplished at hurdle jumping, but there are no more hurdles at the end of their senior year, and so they face this, for the first time in their lives, really this notion of having to make decisions in uncharted waters. After that class became quite successful, just had an article in Fast Company about this class. We were asked to do a class for freshmen, which is called Designing Your Stanford. We now do a class for master's students and PhD students called Designing the Professional. And off campus, we run a mid-career workshop for people in their 30s, 40s, 50s who are working on this problem. And I got to say, of all the class, this was just a side project for me. In addition to this is mostly just what I was doing just to help my seniors, so I didn't have to do this in office hours. My main job is to run the design programs where we give degrees in design, and most of the students taking these classes are not design students. But I'd have to say the results have been rather amazing. This is the one class now I get from the students from 2006, 2007, 2008. I get emails all the time from people saying, I'm still using the Designing Your Life tools and techniques. I'm designing, my first job was fantastic. My second job is going to be even better. This really helps ground me in the world, gives me a voice, a place to speak from. And, thank you so much. And by the way, since all my colleagues at work don't know how to do this, I'm teaching them these techniques. So it's kind of gone viral in a way we weren't expecting. But I think it's because it's an interesting problem. What's the most interesting problem? The most interesting problem is you. And what do you spend most of your time thinking about? You spend most of your time thinking about what's going to work for you. And it's an uncharted, poorly bounded problem. It's really about designing the future, but you can't know anything about the future, not specifically. And so you need these kinds of iterative and dynamic techniques to sort of design your way into the future that you want to have and have some agency in that. So it's been an exciting journey, and we're in the process of putting the class into a book. And that book will be out in about a year. But we thought we'd introduce you to some of the ideas. And one of the ideas that we talk about is this notion of passion. A lot of career guidance or life guidance starts with, hey, what are you passionate about? Tell me what you're passionate about, and I'll tell you how to get it. And for most people, that's a pretty destructive question. It turns out, and we're talking about data that we get from Bill Damon, who's one of our colleagues here at Stanford. He runs the Center for the Study of Adolescence, and he takes adolescents all the way up through 25. But there's other studies that take Bill's work past 25 into your 30s, your 40s, your 50s. And it turns out that if you survey people, the data tells us that only about 20% of the population can identify any singular passion, something that drives their activities every day, something around which they can form their career, their calling, their work in the world. And it turns out, particularly when you're talking about, highly educated and really people with lots of capacity, this question really doesn't work at all, because the rest of us either have many, many things that excite us, lots and lots of different passions, or know one thing that rises to the level of that one thing I want to do for the rest of my life. So we kind of reject a technique that starts with 80% of the people not able to engage, because if you've ever run across this question, or you've been working on, gee, what do I want to do with my career, or what comes next for me? I'm kind of bored in this job. I'm not sure what I want to do. And somebody says, well, just tell me what your passion is, and then we're ready to go. And you can't identify one. What happens, the research tells us, is that you're actually set back even farther than the starting point of where you had been originally. Because now you go on a pursuit of something that you don't have, and that the research tells us you probably are not going to find. Passions are not something that are intrinsic inside of you and then you simply realize them. The research says that what happens is you work, and by working in different roles, you discover the roles that have the best resonance for you, the best fit for your strengths, signature strengths, and the roles that start to turn on a passion for the work. So it's not something you have or find, it's something you work into. And so everybody's got it backwards, or at least everybody who's not in the 20% has it backwards, and it sets people back, and we're really the anti-passion guys. So we're not going to start there. There is there's a big sign over the graduate design studio that's right outside the front door that the students have put up, and the sign says, "You are here." We start with wherever you are. You got a passion? Great, we can work with that. Don't have a passion? Doesn't matter. We're pretty agnostic about the starting point, as long as it's really grounded in who you are and what you know about yourself now. Because it's an interesting problem to try to invent your future. The recognition of your future is a difficult thing to have, since by definition your future doesn't exist. Let's try a couple of really simple little experiments, and I'll explain. This might help explain what I'm talking about. So this is a really simple simple diagram, and I'm going to ask you what you see. Don't bother, you don't have to send in a chat or anything. Just look at this, and we'll do this without feedback. You're looking at this bunch of splots of ink on the page. What do you see? Stare at it for a little while. It's kind of hard to figure out what it is, particularly in probably a webinar. I'm not sure what the resolution you guys are seeing this at. But what it is there's a Dalmatian. If you look carefully at that set of blobs, inside that set of blobs, there's, in this outline, you can kind of tell there's a picture of a Dalmatian. But it's really hard to see because of the background noise and the lack of outline. It's not really clear what it is until you see it. But once you see it, you can kind of see that it's there, right? Okay, so that's one kind of problem, the Dalmatian problem. Now we're going to do the other problem. Where's Waldo? Everybody, if you have kids or something, you know about the Waldo thing. You get these illustrations. There's a picture with a whole bunch of people, and everybody's in brightly colored outfits. And the question is, where's Waldo? And the answer is, Waldo's right there, I think. A little bit hard to tell. But these are really different puzzles. And the question I want you to ask yourselves, how does the Dalmatian puzzle differ from the Waldo puzzle? Right? In the Dalmatian case, you had no idea what you were looking for. And it only became obvious once you saw it, right? Once someone pointed out to you, oh, see this little cluster of black and white spots? If you look at it just right, you'll see the Dalmatian. So in the Dalmatian case, you had no idea what you were looking for, and you pattern matched until something fit, and then that became the Dalmatian. But once you saw it, it was really quite simple to see it again. The Waldo puzzle is quite different. You know exactly what you're looking for. You're looking for this guy that looks like Waldo. And then the only thing you have to do is very carefully scan the picture to match the image of Waldo. So this is exactly like finding your future, finding your place in the world. It's not a Waldo puzzle. Everybody tries to turn it into a Waldo puzzle. Oh, tell me what you're passionate about. Tell me what you're good at. Take this assessment, and and the assessment will say you should be an architect, or you should be a doctor, or you should be a garbage collector. It doesn't work that way, because it turns out, in most cases, there's a lot more you that could possibly be expressed than any of these assessments could indicate. And so we're looking into the future, and the future is this set of really interesting but ambiguous possibilities, and we're trying to see which one looks the most like me, or most like the Dalmatian. But we need a couple of different things for that to work, because we don't know exactly what we're looking for. It's not a Waldo. In the course of the class, we've developed a couple of different things. Suggesting is that the designing of your future is more like the Dalmatian puzzle than the Waldo puzzle. And so what we've come up with is we've evolved a method, and it's kind of a model, where we put design thinking in the middle, this accept, define, ideate, prototype, and test model. And below that, we put some discovery and support systems, some practices for making your life robust, ways of making decisions, what we call discernments, ways of finding mentors and putting in communities. These are things that support your investigation using design thinking about your life. And then above that, we put the meaning-making layer. People write a point of view, a work view, and a world view. And we combine those things with a series of exercises. We've got a bunch of different exercises in the class on meaning making. We do a worldview, design thinking, Odyssey years, a strengths quest, and other things. We do a whole bunch of things inside the design thinking layer, and networking, brainstorming, reframes, offers versus job, major career linkages, things like that. And then we do a bunch of things in the discovery and support layer, all of which lead to something we call an Odyssey plan, which is the final piece that the students do in the class. But what I want to do today, because we can't obviously do all of this in an hour, I want to talk about two particular assessments that we do that I think really help with the you are here and ground your investigation about your potential futures in something that gives you a sort of a dashboard about parts of your life, particularly parts that are related to how is the job or career that you're in fitting. And with these assessments, these little dashboards, kind of like, think of them as like, lights on your dashboard on the car. When they're nice and green, things are good. When they're yellow, that maybe something is going on. And if you have a red light on your dashboard, it's time to stop and pull over and take a look at what's going on with the vehicle. Same thing with your life. And these two assessments work in that direction. So the first idea is to introduce you to the concept of flow. Again, we didn't invent this. A psychologist named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, I believe that's how you spell it. I know that's how you spell it. I think that's how you say it. He's one of the early people in the positive psychology movement. He and Martin Seligman were two of the founders of the positive psychology movement. Positive psychology is just the study of healthy, thriving people to figure out what makes them that versus the study of people with psychosis. And he wrote a book called Flow, the Psychology of Optimal Experience. And what he did is he had people report in. He had a method of sort of interrupting people's daily lives. And he did it with thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And they would report in on their state. And every once in a while, he noticed that people would report, hey, I was doing this thing, and it was like, wow, time stood still, and I was totally engaged. And he saw that coming up again and again and again in his data, and he realized that this is really what he had captured was this sort of peak experience, flow experience. People call it in the zone, whatever. But it was an experience that was really critical to people's sense of well-being and thriving. So that's the cover of the book, and the qualities of a flow state are that time seems to stand still. You're completely involved in the activity. There's almost a sense of ecstasy or pleasure about the thing. There's an inner clarity and serenity. Now, if you do anything athletic, if you do anything, physical yoga or other things, sometimes you probably have experienced a state like this. Everybody has these. They're not unique. They're not special. And what he came up with was this model. And it's on the bottom axis is skills, on the vertical axis is challenge. And when the activity challenges you just at the level of your ability, and that can be as a beginner or even as an expert, you're in what he called the flow channel. If the activity doesn't challenge your skills very much, you're in the boredom zone. If the activity is way beyond your current skills, you're in the anxiety zone. But when you're right at that optimal point of balance, you're in the flow channel, and so there's a challenge skill balance. You have really clear outcomes that you're looking for. You're getting immediate feedback, and you're hyper-focused in this state. So this is a really interesting state of being, and it's not necessarily about some extraordinary peak activity. You don't have to be climbing Everest to do this. I often find myself in flow states when I'm cooking. I enjoy cooking, just chopping an onion, just being right there, chopping that onion and getting it just right and making it perfect. The little 30-second flow state. Sometimes when I'm reading or researching or I'm putting together a new slide deck, I'll have a flow state of kind of really understanding exactly what it is I want to say. So you've probably experienced these as well. And here's the homework that we have people do, and I'd like you, if you're interested, I'd like you to take a look at this. I'd like you to keep what we call a flow journal for 1 week. And what you do is it's just at the end of the day, find yourself a little book, a journal, just a couple of loose pieces of paper stapled together. And I want you to remember the day, walking through the day and saying, I got up this morning, I went to Starbucks, I came into the office, I had a budget meeting, whatever happened to you. Write down any observations you have of when you might have been either in a very calm and relaxed state or all the way into what you would consider a flow state. You can just tracking your experience and then sort of isolating the ones that you think might have been more flowy will, in fact, cause you to remember the day and sort of savor it a bit. And you will probably start to notice, if you do this for a week, that there are moments in every day when you discover, wow, I was totally engaged in that activity and I wasn't even really, I wasn't distracted, I wasn't multitasking, I was right on balance. Okay, so the first piece of work that we have students do, and I invite you to do if you'd like, is to keep a flow journal. And that leads to the next tool, which we look at this thing called engagement versus energy. So I'm going to suggest that the next thing you do is take the results of this flow journal. Like I had a state of flow when I was baking that cake, and I had a state of flow. I was listening to books on tape, and I was just totally engaged in the story, whatever those are. Take those entries from your flow journal and add what we call engagements from your weekly calendar. So engagements are any discrete activities that took us, a significant amount of your attention or energy. Engagements aren't necessarily pick up the kids from daycare, but if you carpool every week and you're part of the carpool, and that's one of your tasks that you do every week, that's an engagement. But just driving to the grocery store isn't necessarily an engagement. So take the major engagements from the week and put these on a timeline and just sort of say, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did a flow state here, flow state here. They don't have to necessarily be in the exact order, but I like to sort of chart a week, and I want you to do it like this. The horizontal axis is my engagements. You see here I took a week of my engagements. I went to art class, I did a budget meeting, I have office hours with my students, I had a faculty meeting, and so on. So this isn't my whole week, but it's a simplified set of, kind of major engagements for the week. And then I've got an energy axis. The vertical axis is energy. Above the axis is positive energy, below is negative. Now this is a subjective judgment. This is a self-reported judgment. When I go to art class, do I leave with more energy than I came in? Or is it an energy sort of, depleting activity? So my art class is 3 hours, once a week. I go to a studio and we draw figure drawing. With a nude model, and we draw for 3 hours. No matter how tired I am at the end of my day, because this doesn't happen until 7 o'clock in the evening on Mondays, no matter how tired I am at the end of my day, as soon as I walk into that studio, I'm energized. And I leave 3 hours later, paradoxically quite tired because it's hard to draw for 3 hours, and full of energy. So it's a subjective evaluation of, that's an activity that seems to give me energy. Now, we had a budgeting meeting because we're doing some rebudgeting at Stanford here. And I believe that meeting just exhausted. It's not an energy positive. My office hours with my students, I love it. I love talking with my students. Super high energy. Both of those, I'd say, I go into a state of flow where oftentimes in office hours, I'll look up and I'm an hour late for my next meeting, but the engagement with the students have been so interesting that I just can't leave. Faculty meeting, sometimes good, sometimes bad. Straddles the line. You get the idea. When I do a workout and I do my 2-mile walk and I feel good about that, I'm good. So what I want you to do is lay out this sort of time engagements versus energy graph based on activities from your weekly calendar and your activities from your flow journal. Just do those two things, and then you'll probably notice some interesting contradictions or some interesting data. One thing that I noticed is that although I enjoy my office hours, I also have my master's students doing their thesis projects, and I do coaching every week. We get together for a coaching session. I coach them on their thesis projects. And I noticed, to my surprise, that when I actually sat down and rated that, that was an energy minus activity. That was taking energy out of my day. Now, I like my master's students, and if I see them in office hours, it's quite engaging. But there was something about master's coaching that wasn't working for me. And so when I went in to discover what that was all about, it had to do with the environment we're in. We're in this messy studio environment, so I can't concentrate. And it had to do with the sort of negative engagement that the coaching turned out. It wasn't coaching so much as telling them what was going wrong. And so I have taken action to change both of those things, and I'm going to re-rate my activities in a couple of weeks to see if I've added energy to my day. And while it's subjective, I want to do a little bit of things on this, and I'll let you guys ask questions after this. Some interesting data that I've been following, because I read a lot of the neuroscience on creativity. It's kind of my field, so I need to know what's going on. And here's a really interesting piece of data, and it comes from a field of neuroscience called neuroeconomics, where they're looking at energy consumption. The economy of the body is basically just a big energy system. You're taking about 2,000 calories a day. On average, people eat about 2,000 calories of food, and that's the energy your body runs on, those 2,000 calories. Now, the interesting thing is that the human brain only weighs about 2 or 3% of your average body weight. It's about a 3-pound squishy ball of neurons. So you'd think, well, if it weighs 3% of the body, it should take 3% of the energy. But it turns out the human brain is the most energy consumptive organ in the body. It takes 25% of the energy, 500 calories a day just to run your brain. And this theory posits that if it took any more than that, there wouldn't be enough energy to run your heart and liver and lungs and everything else. And so that the brain has evolved through resource competition to be as efficient as it can be, but to take as much energy as is possible. So what this tells me is that looking at how what you attend to, what you literally pay attention to, what your reality is every day, what you do, what you see, what you think, and how you spend your attention is literally what you're spending the majority of your energy on. This is what all that food is being turned into. It's being turned into thoughts and actions and intentions. So by paying attention, by plotting this as a graph, it's bringing this data, which is very subtle, into our attention and allowing us to act on it in a way that we didn't have access to before. So it's a really interesting tool, and we find that when you do this, it's a huge opportunity to start to look at what is working in your life that satisfies you and what is working in your life that's pulling energy out of you, and to redistribute that in a way that works. My examples was, coaching my master's students. I'm doing that now in a completely new way. I've prototyped a new way to do it. We're going to do that for about 2 or 3 weeks, and then I'm going to relook at this energy graph and see what we get out of it. I'd really like to see the results of this exercise from you guys, and we have, hundreds of people, 474 people on this webinar right now, and probably another A couple hundred will watch it, not live, or listen to it not live. So I'd love it if people would actually take on the challenge of doing a one-week flow journal and just looking at a 1 week of your daily tasks. Lay them out in this energy versus engagement graph and email it to me. And for anybody who does that, we will send out a summary of all the submissions back to the people who participated, because I'm trying to get a larger data set on this tool to see what sort of patterns are revealed. Now, I'll just get the first week. Normally, we have people do this assessment once a month. I'll just get the first week, and maybe you can put any comments down of either anomalies or things that have become clearer to you by using this tool. So I'm interested in that as well. But I'm just also interested to see what the summary of, energy distributions are. Does everybody think budget meetings are boring? Does everybody love, coaching Little League teams? I don't know. I mean, I'm curious to see what will happen. You can certainly, we will certainly anonymize the data. I'm not looking for you to reveal anything, private or personal, and we will not. I don't have any way to save. If you email it to me, I'll know it's your graph. But I guarantee you that we will not allow the information to go back out tagged in any way with identity. I'm just curious to see what what people do when they look at their lives through this lens. So the takeaways are: we actually do believe you can design your life. We have lots and lots of tools: gratefulness journal, empathy maps. We end up with an Odyssey plan, 3 plans for your future. We really try to blow up the myth that passion is the starting point, because it doesn't work for most people. We know that flow journals help us notice when we're operating at our peak, and when we pay attention to that noticing, when we notice these behaviors, we actually start changing the behaviors and doing more of them. We also notice that when our energy goes wherever our energy goes can be redesigned, and so that we can tune our engagements to create a more effective life. And that our attention is what consumes most of our energy, and this is not a zero-sum game. You actually gain energy above and beyond what you have intrinsically by participating in flow states, peak experiences, and rebalancing your life to do the things that are an energy positive. Not sure, the laws of thermodynamics would say that's not true, but I think when we're thinking about the laws of human dynamics, there are more possibilities. So that's the deal. I'm sure there are questions, and I'm happy to answer questions about either the tool, how to use it, or other things about the Designing Your Life curriculum. I've got a couple of there's a couple of questions already. One question is, what's Akiwizi, A-K-I-W-I-Z-I? That is, I know it when I see it. This pattern matching thing that humans are so good at. I mean, you have a massively organized brain around this notion of pattern matching. There's a lot of new brain science on why the brain even exists, but one of the things that is in your brain even before you know anything, when you come out of the womb, you have the ability immediately to recognize faces. Infants immediately identify the faces in the room when they're born, know which one is their mother. And so the I know it when I see it exercise is we show people a whole series of things similar to the Dalmatian puzzle. And they have, and they report their direct subjective experience. And oftentimes we find that although it's hard to put certain things into words, our ability to pattern match is so extraordinary that we can find the Dalmatians in our future just by being open to this kind of observational thing. Another question is the flow channel the same as being in the zone? Sure, it's the zone is typically used to describe athletic performance, but sure, I believe what Csikszentmihalyi has identified in the psychology literature, which he named flow, is really just validating that this zone experience exists. If you've ever been an athlete at any level, there are certain times when you just can't miss that jump shot, or you just can't, that backhand, that backhand down the, reverse line in a tennis match or something. It's just yours, and you don't even have to think about it. Or you hit the perfect, driver on the first hole of your golf game and the start of your vacation, and you just know it's going to be a great game. So yes, flow and zone are probably identical. Somebody's asking a question, in a world of interruptions, email and short attention spans and multitasking, do you have any suggestions for focusing? Focusing and follow through seem to be difficult because of the way we are constantly bombarded with interruptions. I don't know about you guys. I get about 250 emails a day, probably 100 of which are actually actionable. And so it is a very difficult thing nowadays with the media environments and the work environments that we live in. And people expect an instant answer to most of their queries. So there is a discipline to focus, which is critical. One of our colleagues, Cliff Nass, in the communication school, is the guy who did the multitasking studies that demonstrate that multitasking doesn't work, that this generation of students who think they're so good at it are terrible, and that in fact the human brain isn't set up for multitasking. What you're mostly doing is doing sequential tasks very rapidly over and over again, and you're breaking them into smaller and smaller subsets. As you do that, you lose efficiency, you don't gain. And so, truly what you spend your attention on is the only thing you can think about. The human conscious thought process is a single channel and linear process. There are any number of techniques for refinding your focus and turning off these other activities, but I think the important observation from the psychology that we use is that multitasking is a myth. And so you think you're doing, you think you are gaining efficiency, but you're really not, and you want to not do it. For flow journals, how likely is it that we're in a flow state when we are doing something that is different from routine? And then would we lose that state if that new activity became routine? I don't think that's maybe the right way to think about it. In fact, flow states are often only come, certainly in athletics or in cooking or in other in skills-based activities, flow states only come when your skills reach a certain level. And so I think routine is part of creating flow states. And I don't think I don't think you ruin the ability to have flow if it becomes routine. But I think there are rote activities which are mindless that would probably get in the way of flow states. Flow states are high attention states. If we put your brain in a brain scanner, many parts of the brain are lighting up, and it is a very high attention state to a singular activity. And so routine is actually helpful in that regard. I think we got to move to a couple of other items, just a few things quickly. When's the book coming out? In a year from June, and when is the submissions due? I think it's going to take a week for people to kind of complete the journal. So 2 weeks from today is when I'll probably gather up whatever the submissions are and start doing the sort of statistics on them, and anything that comes in after that I probably won't use. So let's say that if you can get me something a couple of weeks from today, that would be fantastic. I got maybe one last question, which I think is in some ways a sort of a summary question, and I'm not sure if the person asking it is sort of happy, sad, or mournful, or resigned. But the question is, if you don't know your passion, then will you spend your whole life looking for it, or should you just settle with what you've got and be happy? I think this is one of the reasons why I just hate this passion question. It's like there's nothing wrong with not having a passion. So let me reframe the question. in a way that I think might be more generative. Of course, I'm looking to design a future in my job, in my life, with my friends, my family, my spouse, my relationships. I want it to be engaged. I want it to be creative. I want it to be exciting. All of those things are easily understandable, and you can navigate towards good outcomes in all of those. I can look at my energy map and decide that certain things just really suck energy out of me and I don't want them to be part of my job description anymore. And I can work over the next 6 or 12 months to sort of maximize the number of things I do in the job that utilize my signature strengths, that help me be more creative, and that add to my connections with my colleagues and my peers. So I can do those things, and I can do other things to manage the things that I do in my life to move towards creativity, towards engagement, towards the kinds of things that the positive psychologists have shown us create, more of a thriving lifestyle. I need to be engaged. I need achievement. I need to be recognized for the work that I do. So once I'm aware of these things, I can start designing and prototyping small changes in my life to get the kinds of things more and more often. No one has a perfect life. No one has a life that it's not all hot fudge sundaes and stuff. Sometimes there's broccoli. Sometimes there's Brussels sprouts or whatever vegetable you don't like. I happen to kind of like Brussels sprouts now. They've gone through a resurgence in my diet. But I mean, there's always going to be stuff that's tough. But it's not about that. It's about resiliency. It's about having a sense of direction, which gives you a sense of purpose. Daniel Pink, in his book on motivation called Drive, said that people work for autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy you give yourself. Mastery you create by working hard and developing skills. And purpose is what comes from an intentional design of your life. And so I don't think you're ever going to, never say I'm going to settle for what I have and be happy with it. But Martin Seligman, one of the other founders of the positive psychology movement, says, look, it's not about finding the perfect job. That's just not out there. It's about finding the job you can make perfect. And there's a whole thing we do in class around discernments. How do we know what we know? How do we know what our gut feelings are really telling us? How can we take our intuitive understandings and matching them up with our explicit rational understandings and come up with a way to discern what's the right path for me forward? It's hard work, but all that information is available to you, and so we're really committed to what can you do, what's the next step, what's the next step after that, because if you work on the job you can make perfect, and you employ this sort of attention to these kinds of outcomes, our experience is you get what you plan for, you get what you design. And then when you put yourself in the next situation, you've designed a new set of configurations of the world and your relationships, then new things become available to you. And in that process, the sort of virtuous cycle of designing your way forward, you find yourself after a while really starting to notice all of the ways in which your life design is coming together to make you a more generous, more generative, more creative person. We all have a very creative person inside us. David Kelly's new book on creative confidence, David and his brother Tom wrote this about creative confidence. Everybody has a creative person inside them. I don't care what script you are currently repeating in your head about yourself as a creative person. You were creative when you were 3 or 4 or 5. Somewhere along the line through education or some other socialization process, maybe you lost confidence in that creativity, but once you turn that back on by using design methods to turn it back on, you can apply that creativity to the most important and most interesting design problem you've got, and that's your life. So we have some evidence. We've had 2 PhDs study the technique. We've shown statistically significant increases in self-actualization, in creativity, and getting rid of dysfunctional beliefs that are not functional about your life and what it means. And so we actually have what we would consider to be scientific, or at least social science validation of the methodology. So we're out of time. I'm going to leave you with there. Thank you very much for your attention, and hopefully you weren't multitasking. And we have the second half of this will be on
May 13th.
May 13th.
So please join us for the next event on May 13th, Prototypes for Personal Success. If you're interested in additional webinars prior to that event, we also have webinars available on the SCPD website, scpd.stanford.edu. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.